Amanda Halterman didn't announce her exit. She didn't tease it, didn't soften it with a farewell post, didn't sit down for a dramatic confessional. She walked out. And in doing so, she cracked open one of TLC's most tightly controlled franchises. For years, 1,000, LB sisters had survived on chaos that felt familiar: sibling tension, health scares, emotional breakdowns packaged neatly into episodic arcs. Viewers believed they were watching raw reality. But what happened behind closed doors this year wasn't content. It wasn't drama curated for cameras. It was a rupture. According to multiple insiders with direct knowledge of the incident, Amanda Halterman abruptly severed ties with TLC following a closed-door confrontation that escalated beyond anything the network had ever anticipated. What was meant to be a routine production meeting, one of dozens that happen every season, spiraled into an explosive standoff that left production frozen and executives scrambling. There were no cameras rolling.
No microphones clipped.
No safety net of edits or music cues. Just truth colliding with control. Internally, the incident is already being described as one of the most volatile behind-the-scenes breakdowns in TLC history. And the network doesn't want to talk about it. Amanda doesn't want to talk about it yet. But silence, in this case, has only made the shockwaves louder. At the center of the storm was a meeting scheduled to discuss future filming plans and storyline direction. On paper, it was procedural. In reality, it became the moment where years of unspoken tension finally detonated. Sources say Amanda had already been feeling cornered long before that meeting took place. While the show initially revolved around Tammy and Amy Slayton, Amanda's presence had steadily grown, so much so that she became one of the most trusted, grounding figures in the series. Viewers saw her as blunt but fair, tough but deeply loyal. Behind the scenes, producers saw something else. They saw leverage. As the seasons progressed, Amanda was increasingly pushed into conflict-driven roles. Her honesty was sharpened. Her boundaries were framed as aggression. Her moments of calm were trimmed away, while her reactions were replayed, slowed, emphasized. She felt boxed in, one source close to the family revealed. Every time she spoke up, it was edited to look hostile. Every time she set a boundary, it became a storyline. By the time cameras were rolling for the most recent production cycle, Amanda's relationship with the show had already begun to fracture. Quietly at first, then unmistakably. The breaking point came when producers showed Amanda early cuts of upcoming episodes, footage she had not yet seen. What she watched, insiders say, didn't resemble her life. The edits emphasized family conflict while stripping away context, nuance, and reconciliation. Moments meant to show care and concern were shortened or removed entirely. What remained was tension, clean, sharp, and profitable. She watched in silence. One individual present recalled. Then she said, "That's not me. And you know it." That sentence changed everything. The room went still. Then it exploded. Voices were raised. Accusations flew. Amanda reportedly confronted producers directly, accusing them of manipulating scenes, provoking reactions, and prioritizing ratings over reality. At one point, production assistants were asked to leave. The door was shut. She wasn't emotional, an insider said. She was furious, but controlled. Amanda made it clear she would not be turned into a villain for entertainment. Not at the expense of her mental health. Not at the cost of her family. Not for a narrative she didn't recognize anymore. When the argument reached its peak, Amanda stood up. She gathered her belongings. And she delivered what one witness called a final statement, quiet, firm, irreversible. She said she was done sacrificing her peace for a storyline that erased who she really was. Then she walked out. Within hours, production shut down. Calls were made to TLC executives. Legal teams were notified. Filming schedules were suspended. And Amanda Halterman, one of the show's most visible and reliable figures, became unreachable. By the next morning, she had blocked multiple producers. She declined further meetings. All communication, she instructed, would go through legal representation. There was no exit interview. No farewell episode. No controlled goodbye. Only absence. And that absence would soon speak louder than anything Amanda could have said on camera. Amanda Halterman's walkout didn't just interrupt filming. It sent a shockwave through TLC that insiders say was felt almost immediately at the highest levels of the network. What initially appeared to be a heated creative dispute quickly revealed itself to be something far more destabilizing, a complete breakdown of trust between one of the franchise's most credible cast members and the production system that relied on her presence. Within hours of Amanda leaving the set, the tone inside the production offices reportedly shifted from irritation to alarm. Emergency meetings were called. Executive producers, network attorneys, and senior TLC leadership were looped in almost instantly. Calendars were cleared.
Phones rang continuously.
Emails were marked urgent. This was no longer about repairing a damaged relationship or smoothing over a disagreement. It was about damage control. According to sources familiar with those early conversations, the network's primary concern wasn't how to explain Amanda's sudden absence to viewers. It was what Amanda might do next. She wasn't just another cast member who could be quietly written out or replaced. She had seniority. She had proximity to the inner workings of the show. And, perhaps most troubling for the network, she had credibility with the audience. Amanda wasn't supposed to leave, one insider admitted. She was supposed to stay, keep filming, keep playing her role. But she didn't. That reality forced TLC to confront a scenario it had not planned for. Amanda had walked away without a farewell scene, without an exit interview, without allowing production to shape the narrative of her departure. There was no footage to contextualize her absence, no confessional to soften the blow, just silence. And in the world of reality television, silence is dangerous. Internally, discussions quickly turned to exposure. Legal teams began reviewing contracts, non-disclosure agreements, and participation clauses. Editors were instructed to pause work on episodes that featured Amanda prominently. Some scenes were flagged for review. Others were put on hold entirely. No one wanted to make a move that could provoke further conflict or cross a line that might invite legal consequences. There was real fear, one source said quietly. No one wanted to poke the bear. Part of that fear stemmed from what Amanda knew. She had spent years inside the production ecosystem. She had watched how scenes were shaped, how pressure was applied, how emotional moments were escalated for effect. She understood how narratives were built not just in front of the camera, but in editing rooms and production meetings. If she chose to speak publicly, she wouldn't need to exaggerate. The truth alone would be enough. Behind closed doors, executives reportedly debated how to proceed without drawing attention to the rupture. Some believed silence was the safest option, that acknowledging Amanda's exit would only fuel speculation. Others worried that viewers would notice her absence immediately and interpret the lack of explanation as confirmation that something serious had gone wrong. For now, the network chose silence. But the logistical consequences were unavoidable. Amanda had been deeply woven into the show's structure. Entire storylines depended on her presence. Scenes already filmed relied on her role as mediator, caretaker, and voice of reason. Removing her wasn't as simple as cutting a few minutes of footage. It required reworking the emotional architecture of the season. You take her out and the whole dynamic collapses, a production source admitted. It's not the same show. As editors scrambled to make sense of incomplete arcs, producers began attempting quiet outreach through intermediaries. Not official reconciliation offers, but feelers. Messages meant to test whether Amanda might be willing to talk once tempers cooled. According to multiple sources, she declined every attempt. She had blocked direct contact and made it clear she was not interested in informal negotiations. She shut it down completely, one insider said. There was no opening. That refusal only deepened internal unease. If Amanda wasn't trying to negotiate, then she wasn't trying to leverage her position for better terms. She was done, and that made her unpredictable. Meanwhile, word began spreading quietly through the production ranks. Crew members noticed filming schedules changing. Conversations felt tense. Scenes were res-hot or abandoned without explanation. There was a growing awareness that something fundamental had shifted, even if no one was saying it out loud. Outside the network, fans were beginning to notice too. Amanda's sudden disappearance from promotional posts didn't go unnoticed. Her social media, once filled with behind-the-scenes moments and supportive messages about her sisters, had gone silent on all things related to the show. In their place appeared cryptic statements about peace, boundaries, and walking away. To viewers who had followed her journey for years, the change was jarring. Inside TLC, that reaction was exactly what executives feared. Amanda's absence wasn't fading into the background. It was becoming a presence of its own. And the longer the network stayed silent, the more space there was for speculation to grow. What had started as a private confrontation was now threatening to become a public reckoning. And for the first time since the franchise began, TLC found itself on the defensive, not against ratings drops or competition, but against the possibility that one of its own stars had chosen dignity over compliance and walked away with her credibility intact. The question no one could answer was simple and terrifying. What happens if she decides to speak? As Amanda Halterman's absence settled in, the consequences began to ripple outward in ways TLC could no longer fully control. What had initially been framed internally as a temporary disruption quickly exposed deeper structural vulnerabilities within the production itself. The longer Amanda remained silent and unreachable, the clearer it became that this was not a cooling-off period. It was a permanent shift. Inside production offices, editors and producers found themselves confronting a practical nightmare. Large portions of the season had been built around Amanda's role as the emotional anchor of the family. She wasn't just present in scenes, she shaped them. She mediated arguments, grounded emotional blow-ups, and often provided the connective tissue between Tammy, Amy, and the rest of the family. Without her, entire sequences lost coherence. Editors reportedly began noticing something unsettling as they reviewed footage. Scenes felt incomplete even when Amanda wasn't the focus. Conversations ended abruptly. Emotional arcs felt unresolved. Moments that once relied on Amanda's responses to land with weight now felt hollow. Attempts to trim her presence without drawing attention to it only highlighted the gaps further. It felt like trying to erase gravity, one crew member said. Everything else just floated apart. As post-production stalled, pressure began mounting from above. The show was one of TLC's reliable performers. Delays were not part of the business model. Schedules mattered. Advertising commitments mattered. But no one wanted to make a definitive decision without understanding the legal and reputational risks involved. That uncertainty extended to the cast. While no other family member publicly addressed Amanda's disappearance, sources say private conversations intensified. Questions were asked quietly. Why were scenes being cut? Why were schedules changing? Why did certain conversations feel suddenly off-limits? For the first time, some cast members reportedly began paying closer attention to how their own words were being framed and edited. She said out loud what a lot of people had only thought, one insider explained. And once she did, you couldn't unsee it. Meanwhile, fan communities were doing what they do best, dissecting everything. Viewers began revisiting older episodes, posting clips side by side, pointing out patterns in editing that had previously gone unnoticed. Calm explanations cut short. Reactions replayed. Music cues that amplified tension where little existed. Amanda's past scenes were reevaluated through a new lens. The narrative shifted subtly, but decisively. Instead of asking why Amanda left, fans began asking what she had been protecting herself from. Social media posts praising her decision circulated widely. Comments framed her departure not as quitting, but as escaping. For a network built on audience trust, that reframing was deeply uncomfortable. Inside TLC, executives were now grappling with a broader concern. Amanda's exit wasn't just about one show. It threatened to expose the invisible contract between reality television and its participants, comply with the narrative, or risk losing access, income, and platform. Amanda had broken that contract publicly by refusing to participate further, and she had done so without apology. This sets a precedent, one source admitted. That's what scared them the most. Delays were not part of the business model. Schedules mattered. Advertising commitments mattered. But no one wanted to make a definitive decision without understanding the legal and reputational risks involved. That uncertainty extended to the cast. While no other family member publicly addressed Amanda's disappearance, sources say private conversations intensified. Questions were asked quietly. Why were scenes being cut? Why were schedules changing? Why did certain conversations feel suddenly off-limits? For the first time, some cast members reportedly began paying closer attention to how their own words were being framed and edited. She said out loud what a lot of people had only thought, one insider explained. And once she did, you couldn't unsee it. Meanwhile, fan communities were doing what they do best, dissecting everything. Viewers began revisiting older episodes, posting clips side by side, pointing out patterns in editing that had previously gone unnoticed. Calm explanations cut short. Reactions replayed. Music cues that amplified tension where little existed. Amanda's past scenes were reevaluated through a new lens. The narrative shifted subtly, but decisively. Instead of asking why Amanda left, fans began asking what she had been protecting herself from. Social media posts praising her decision circulated widely. Comments framed her departure not as quitting, but as escaping. For a network built on audience trust, that reframing was deeply uncomfortable. Inside TLC, executives were now grappling with a broader concern. Amanda's exit wasn't just about one show. It threatened to expose the invisible contract between reality television and its participants, comply with the narrative, or risk losing access, income, and platform. Amanda had broken that contract publicly by refusing to participate further, and she had done so without apology. This sets a precedent, one source admitted. That's what scared them the most. If a cast member could walk away entirely, maintain public support, and retain credibility, the balance of power shifted. Other participants might start asking for more control. Or worse, more honesty. The industry relied on the assumption that most people wouldn't leave once they were in deep enough. Amanda proved that assumption wasn't absolute. As weeks passed, TLC's silence began to feel less strategic and more strained. Viewers noticed awkward edits in newer episodes. Conversations seemed truncated. Transitions felt abrupt. The absence wasn't acknowledged, but it was felt. Online, speculation hardened into belief. Something serious had happened, and the network wasn't telling the truth. Behind the scenes, legal teams continued their reviews. Not because Amanda had broken any agreement, but because she hadn't. She had simply stopped participating. That distinction mattered. Contracts were designed to prevent leaks, not silence. They anticipated conflict, not refusal. She's not attacking anyone, one insider said. She's just gone. And that's harder to fight. For Amanda, those close to her say, the chaos unfolding behind the scenes barely registered. By the time fans began demanding answers, she had already emotionally detached from the show. Friends describe her as calm, steady, and resolute. The anger that fueled the confrontation had given way to clarity. She didn't leave in a moment of weakness, a family acquaintance said. She left because she finally saw things clearly. That clarity came with a cost. Walking away meant surrendering a platform, a paycheck, and a familiar rhythm of life. But it also meant reclaiming control over her image and mental health, something she felt had been slowly eroded by years of filming. Privately, Amanda expressed frustration that the situation had escalated so dramatically, but no regret. She had warned producers. She had asked for change. When nothing shifted, she chose herself. Inside TLC, that choice continued to complicate every decision. Without a statement from Amanda, the network couldn't counter her narrative. Without acknowledging the conflict, they couldn't fully move past it. And without her presence, the show felt fundamentally altered. What had once been a tightly managed reality series was now exposed as something more fragile, dependent on cooperation, vulnerable to resistance. And as speculation grew louder and silence stretched on, one thing became increasingly clear to everyone involved. Amanda Halterman had taken something with her when she left. Not footage, not storylines, power. And no one at TLC knew how or if they were going to get it back. By the time TLC began to fully grasp the magnitude of Amanda Halterman's absence, the damage was no longer confined to editing rooms or executive meetings. It had seeped into the cultural conversation surrounding the show itself. What was once accepted as the natural volatility of reality television was now being re-examined as something more deliberate, more calculated, and potentially more harmful. Internally, producers were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Amanda's exit had stripped away the illusion of control. For years, the show had relied on the assumption that cast members would eventually bend. That frustration could be cooled, that anger could be managed, that the promise of continued exposure and income would outweigh discomfort. Amanda didn't bend. She didn't negotiate. She simply removed herself from the equation. That act alone disrupted the hierarchy the show depended on. As production resumed in fragments, those still involved felt the shift immediately. Scenes that once unfolded organically now carried an unspoken tension. Cast members were more cautious. Conversations were measured. There was a growing awareness that what was said could be reshaped later, that context could disappear in the edit. Amanda's departure had made the invisible visible. She changed the temperature of the room, one crew member admitted, even when she's not there. At the same time, rumors began circulating within industry circles. Not public statements, not formal leaks, but quiet acknowledgments that something had gone wrong. Other reality TV professionals recognized the signs: halted edits, silent networks, unexplained absences. The situation with Amanda wasn't unique, but it was rare in its outcome. Most people stayed. Most people adapted. Very few walked away without trying to salvage their position. That refusal to play along was what made the situation so destabilizing. For TLC, the risk was no longer limited to one franchise. If Amanda spoke publicly, calmly, credibly, without exaggeration, it could validate long-standing criticisms of the genre. Claims of selective editing, emotional manipulation, and manufactured conflict had circulated for years, often dismissed as sour grapes or misunderstandings. Amanda didn't fit that narrative. She wasn't disgruntled over money. She wasn't chasing relevance. She was a fan favorite who had everything to lose and still chose to leave. Inside legal departments, this distinction mattered. Contracts could restrict disclosures, but they couldn't erase perception. And perception was shifting fast. Online, fans weren't just speculating anymore. They were organizing. Hashtags calling for transparency gained traction. Long posts dissected episode edits with near forensic detail. Viewers compared raw moments captured on social media to their televised versions, pointing out discrepancies in tone and intent. Amanda's past behavior was reevaluated not as aggression, but as resistance. The phrase "manufactured villain" appeared again and again. This growing awareness placed TLC in an increasingly defensive posture. Any statement risked drawing more attention. Any denial risked contradiction. Silence, once a tactic, began to look like avoidance. And the longer it lasted, the more viewers filled in the gaps themselves. Meanwhile, Amanda remained quiet. Those close to her described this period as intentional restraint rather than retreat. She wasn't hiding. She was observing. She wanted to see how the network would move without her, how the narrative would shift, and whether the truth would surface on its own. There was a sense that speaking too soon would reduce her experience to another headline, another cycle of outrage that would eventually fade. She didn't want noise, one friend said. She wanted clarity. During this time, Amanda focused inward. Away from cameras, she reconnected with parts of her life that had slowly been crowded out by production schedules and public scrutiny. Family gatherings without filming constraints. Conversations without microphones. Moments that didn't need to serve a storyline. It was during this quieter stretch that the personal cost of the show became clearer to her. Not just the stress of filming, but the cumulative weight of being constantly interpreted, edited, and consumed. She had spent years watching strangers argue about her intentions, her tone, her role within her own family. Leaving didn't just remove her from the show. It removed her from that cycle. Ironically, that absence only amplified her presence in the public imagination. Fans spoke about her more after she left than they had when she was on screen every week. Her silence was read as strength. Her refusal to explain herself became a statement in its own right. Inside TLC, this reaction was deeply unsettling. The network had built its success on access, on confessionals, on controlled vulnerability. Amanda was offering none of that, yet still commanding attention. It undermined the fundamental logic of the format. "She's rewriting the rules without saying a word," one insider admitted. As production continued under this cloud, executives faced a growing dilemma. Even if the show survived without Amanda, it would do so changed. The illusion that viewers accepted whatever was presented to them was gone. Audiences were more critical, more aware, more willing to question what they were seeing. Amanda's exit had sharpened that skepticism. And within the cast, something else was happening. While loyalty to the network remained publicly intact, private conversations revealed a shift in mindset. Boundaries were discussed. Questions were asked about edits, about consent, about what was fair game and what wasn't. Amanda's choice had given those conversations legitimacy. "She made it okay to think about leaving," one source said, "even if no one else does." By now, it was clear that this was no longer about a single argument or a single cast member. It was about power, control, and the cost of authenticity in an industry that thrives on distortion. Amanda Halterman had stepped outside that system, and in doing so, exposed how dependent it was on compliance. Whether she ever chose to speak publicly no longer felt like the central issue. Her silence had already said enough. And for TLC, the most troubling realization of all was this: even if Amanda never returned, never gave an interview, never told her story outright, the consequences of her departure would continue to unfold. Because once someone proves they can walk away and be believed, the balance never fully resets. As the fallout continued to spread, the absence of Amanda Halterman began to reveal fractures that had always existed beneath the surface of 1000 LB Sisters but had never been fully exposed. What had once been dismissed as the unavoidable tension of filming a family under pressure was now being reconsidered as the byproduct of a system that thrived on escalation. Inside production, a subtle but undeniable shift took place. Producers became more cautious, not out of newfound sensitivity, but out of necessity. Every interaction carried the awareness that another rupture could occur. The assumption that cast members would endure discomfort for the sake of the show no longer felt safe. Amanda had shown that walking away was possible, and that doing so did not automatically result in public backlash. This realization unsettled the traditional hierarchy. For years, power had flowed in one direction. Storylines were assigned, emotions were shaped, and participation was treated as an obligation rather than a collaboration. Amanda's refusal to continue under those terms disrupted that flow. It forced the network to confront the limits of its influence. At the same time, the narrative surrounding Amanda herself continued to evolve. Without new footage to reinterpret her behavior, fans began revisiting her past appearances with fresh eyes. Moments that had once been framed as confrontational were now seen as protective. Her bluntness was recontextualized as boundary setting. Her insistence on accountability, once portrayed as aggression, began to look like resistance. The more viewers re-examined her role, the clearer it became that Amanda had often functioned as a stabilizing force. She challenged her sisters when necessary, but she also showed up consistently during medical crises, emotional breakdowns, and moments when the family seemed on the verge of splintering. Those quieter contributions had rarely been emphasized on screen. Without her present to perform them, their absence became obvious. Within the family, the impact was deeply personal. Although none of Amanda's siblings publicly addressed the conflict with TLC, those close to them describe a complicated mix of loyalty, concern, and unease. They were still part of the show, still bound by contracts, still navigating the same production environment that Amanda had rejected. Her departure created an unspoken tension. Not because anyone disagreed with her decision, but because it forced everyone else to confront their own boundaries. Leaving wasn't just a personal choice. It carried consequences for the entire family. She did what she felt she had to do, a family source said. But it changed the landscape for everyone. Outside the family, the industry was watching. quietly but intently. Amanda's situation became a reference point in conversations among reality television professionals. Not as a scandal, but as a case study. What happens when a cast member refuses to be shaped? What happens when silence becomes more powerful than participation? The answers weren't comforting for networks. As scrutiny intensified, the conversation began expanding beyond 1,000 LB sisters. Fans and commentators drew parallels to other reality shows, other cast members who had spoken out about manipulation, burnout, and loss of agency. Amanda's story fit into a larger pattern, one that suggested her experience was not an anomaly but a symptom. That broader context made TLC's silence increasingly untenable. Each day, without acknowledgement, felt less like restraint and more like avoidance. Viewers noticed. Media outlets noticed. Analysts began questioning whether the network was underestimating the long-term impact of eroded trust. Meanwhile, Amanda's personal life took on a different rhythm. Away from filming, she faced challenges that had nothing to do with storylines or edits. Health concerns emerged. Breathing issues. Heart irregularities. Real problems that required attention and rest, not cameras. In a strange way, stepping away from the show may have come at exactly the right time. Friends say she approached these challenges with the same blunt realism that had defined her on screen. She didn't dramatize them. She didn't hide them either. When she did briefly resurface on social media, it wasn't to explain her departure from the show. It was to ask for prayers, to update followers on her condition, and to acknowledge that her family was going through a difficult period. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of comments, messages of support, people sharing their own health struggles and offering encouragement. It was a reminder that Amanda's connection with viewers extended far beyond her role in a television narrative. They cared about her as a person, not a character. That distinction mattered. For years, the show had blurred the line between Amanda's real life and her on-screen persona. Now, separated from the machinery of production, she was being received differently. Not as a source of drama, but as a human being navigating hardship. This shift further complicated the network's position. Amanda wasn't fading into obscurity. She was redefining her relationship with the audience on her own terms. Without confessionals. Without edits. Without intermediaries. As the season continued to move forward in her absence, the show struggled to fill the space she left behind. New dynamics emerged, but they felt different. Less grounded. More exposed. The contrast only reinforced what viewers had already begun to suspect. Amanda had been holding more together than anyone realized. And as questions about the future of the show grew louder, about renewal, direction, and sustainability, one truth became increasingly difficult to ignore. Amanda Halterman hadn't just left 1,000 LB sisters. She had changed it, and no amount of editing could undo that. As time moved on, the conversation around Amanda Halterman's departure began to mature. What initially felt like shock slowly evolved into something heavier, reckoning. The drama of the walkout gave way to deeper questions about cost, consent, and the emotional toll of being turned into content year after year. Inside TLC, the focus quietly shifted from crisis management to long-term survival. Executives could no longer pretend that Amanda's exit was an isolated incident. Her refusal to return, combined with sustained audience sympathy, had destabilized the old assumptions that reality television depended on. The idea that cast members were endlessly replaceable no longer held the same weight. Producers began reassessing how much pressure they could realistically apply before risking another fracture. Scenes were approached more cautiously. Confessionals were handled with greater restraint. Not because the system had suddenly become ethical, but because the risk calculus had changed. Amanda had demonstrated that resistance was possible and that it could resonate. She made walking away look sane, one industry observer noted. That's dangerous for a format built on endurance. For the remaining cast members, this period was quietly transformative. Filming continued, but with an undercurrent of self-awareness that hadn't been present before. Some family members reportedly became more guarded, choosing words carefully, redirecting conversations, or withdrawing from moments that felt engineered. Others leaned more heavily into the structure, filling the emotional vacuum Amanda left behind in ways that sometimes felt forced. The balance that once existed was gone. Amanda, meanwhile, continued to exist outside that world, and in doing so, reclaimed something that had been slipping away from her for years: narrative ownership. Without cameras, she no longer had to explain herself in sound bites. Without producers, she didn't have to escalate emotions to be heard. Her life became quieter, but also clearer. Those close to her say this clarity brought both relief and grief. Relief at escaping a cycle that had become increasingly invasive. Grief for what the show had once promised: a platform to tell her family's story honestly, to document growth, resilience, and connection. Somewhere along the way, that promise had eroded. She believed in it at first, a family acquaintance said. That's what made the betrayal hurt. As Amanda dealt with ongoing health concerns, the contrast between her real struggles and the dramatized crises of reality television became stark. Breathing issues and heart irregularities demanded patience and rest, not spectacle. For once, her vulnerability wasn't being edited, replayed, or packaged for an audience. It was private, and that privacy felt protective. When she did choose to share updates, they were simple and direct.
No dramatic framing. No narrative arc.
Just honesty. The response from followers reinforced what many had already sensed. Amanda didn't need the show to matter. Her connection with people existed independently of TLC's platform. This realization quietly undermined one of reality television's core myths, that visibility is granted by the network, not earned through authenticity. As weeks turned into months, speculation about the future of 1000 LB Sisters intensified. Would the show continue without Amanda? Could it maintain its emotional core? Was a seventh season even feasible given the fractures behind the scenes and Amanda's ongoing health challenges? Internally, these questions were being asked with increasing urgency. Amanda's absence had exposed how much of the show's stability rested on her presence, even when she wasn't the focus. She had been the mediator, the challenger, the steady voice in moments of chaos. Without her, conflicts escalated faster and resolved less convincingly. Viewers noticed. Ratings discussions became more cautious. Analysts flagged signs of audience fatigue, particularly among longtime fans who felt the show was losing its grounding. The lack of transparency around Amanda's disappearance continued to erode trust. Every unanswered question compounded the sense that something was being hidden. And yet, Amanda remained silent. Not because she was afraid, but because she no longer needed to explain herself. Her choice had already spoken louder than any interview could. By stepping away, she had exposed the limits of the system without engaging in open warfare. She didn't burn bridges, one insider observed. She just refused to cross them again. This refusal lingered like a quiet challenge to the industry itself. It suggested that dignity didn't have to be dramatic, that reclaiming control didn't require spectacle, that sometimes the most disruptive act is simply choosing not to participate. For Amanda Halterman, life after 1000 LB Sisters was still unfolding. The future remained uncertain, shaped by health, family, and choices yet to be made. But one thing was already clear to everyone watching closely, both inside and outside the network. She had stepped out of the frame. And in doing so, she had revealed how much power the frame itself had been holding. The story was no longer just about a reality show or a producer fight. It was about what happens when someone decides that being seen on their own terms matters more than being seen at all. And that realization, once planted, is difficult to erase. By the time the shock of Amanda Halterman's departure began to settle, a deeper unease had taken hold, one that extended beyond ratings or storylines and into the emotional architecture of the show itself. The absence wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was hollow. And that hollow space changed how everything around it felt. For years, Amanda had occupied an unusual position within the family dynamic on screen. She wasn't the central figure, nor was she a background presence. She moved between those roles fluidly, often acting as the stabilizing force when tensions escalated or emotions spiraled. Without her, The remaining interactions felt sharper, less buffered. Conflicts didn't slow down, they accelerated. Production tried to compensate. New emotional beats were emphasized. Certain personalities were pushed forward. But viewers could sense the imbalance. What once felt grounded and real, if messy, family dynamics now appeared more exposed, more raw, and in some cases, more manufactured. She absorbed a lot of impact, one crew member admitted. Without her, everything hits harder. This shift wasn't just perceptual. Behind the scenes, it affected how scenes were planned and executed. Producers found themselves grappling with a cast that was simultaneously more guarded and more vulnerable. Some participants pulled back, wary of how their words might be framed. Others leaned into the chaos, perhaps unconsciously filling the void Amanda left behind. The result was a show in transition, unsure of its own emotional center. At the same time, Amanda's personal story continued unfolding outside the spotlight. Health struggles demanded her attention, grounding her in realities that couldn't be edited or reframed. Breathing issues, heart irregularities, and exhaustion forced a slower pace, one that stood in stark contrast to the relentless churn of production schedules. Those close to her say this period became one of reassessment, not just about the show, but about identity. For years, Amanda had been known primarily as a reality television figure, her personality filtered through episodes and edits. Stepping away allowed her to reconnect with herself without an audience. She wasn't performing anymore, a friend said. She was just living. That distinction mattered. It gave her space to process what the show had taken as well as what it had given. Fame had brought visibility and opportunity, but it had also introduced pressure, scrutiny, and a constant sense of being evaluated. Without cameras, those weights began to lift. Meanwhile, fans continued to debate the implications of her exit. Discussions shifted from anger to understanding. Many viewers expressed admiration for her decision to prioritize mental and physical health over continued exposure. Others questioned why such a choice felt so radical in an industry built on real people. The conversation around Amanda became symbolic. She represented a broader tension between authenticity and entertainment, between consent and expectation. Her silence allowed others to project meaning onto her choice, turning it into a statement about agency rather than conflict. Inside TLC, this symbolism was not lost. Executives understood that even if Amanda never spoke publicly, her departure had already reshaped the narrative landscape. The network could continue producing content, but it could not easily reclaim the moral high ground. Attempts to normalize her absence only highlighted it further. Viewers noticed when scenes felt incomplete, when emotional beats lacked resolution. The show moved forward, but with a visible limp. For the family, the situation remained delicate. Loyalty, love, and obligation intertwined in complicated ways. Amanda's decision had not broken those bonds, but it had tested them. Filming continued for some. Healing continued for others. The shared history remained, even as paths diverged. She didn't leave the family, a source emphasized. She left the machine. That distinction was critical, yet often misunderstood. Amanda's absence was never about abandonment. It was about refusal. Refusal to be flattened into a character. Refusal to sacrifice well-being for narrative momentum. Refusal to accept that visibility should come at any cost. As speculation about the show's future persisted, one thing became increasingly clear. Whatever direction 1000 Sisters took next, it would do so under the shadow of Amanda's choice. Her exit had become a reference point, a before and after moment that redefined what participation meant. For Amanda herself, the road ahead remained open. Whether she would eventually speak publicly, pursue advocacy, or simply continue living quietly was still unknown. What mattered was that the choice belonged to her. In an industry built on access, exposure, and control, that alone was a radical act. And as the show pressed on without her, it carried with it a silent question that no edit could remove. How much of what viewers once saw as reality depended on the willingness of people like Amanda to stay, even when staying hurt? That question lingered, unresolved, long after the cameras stopped rolling. And in that unresolved space, Amanda Halterman's absence continued to speak. As the months stretched on, the story surrounding Amanda Halterman began to shift yet again. What had first been framed as a dramatic rupture, then understood as a principled refusal, slowly took on another dimension entirely. It became a story about endurance, about what remains after the noise fades and the cameras move on. Inside TLC, the initial urgency mellowed into something closer to resignation. Executives stopped expecting Amanda to return. Producers stopped leaving the door open. The possibility of reconciliation quietly expired, replaced by a pragmatic acceptance that the show would have to survive without her. But acceptance did not mean resolution. The questions Amanda's exit raised continued to hover, unanswered and uncomfortable. Production adapted, but adaptation came with compromise. Storylines were simplified. Emotional arcs were compressed. Without Amanda's stabilizing presence, the show leaned more heavily on spectacle to maintain momentum. For some viewers, this shift was noticeable. For others, it was unsettling. Longtime fans spoke openly about feeling disconnected. The show was still recognizable, but something essential felt diminished. What had once felt like a messy but sincere portrayal of family struggle now seemed more curated, more tense, less forgiving. Amanda's absence wasn't just visible, it was structural. At the same time, Amanda's life outside the show continued to move forward in ways that underscored the contrast between real experience and televised reality. Health issues demanded patience and vulnerability, not performance. Recovery required rest, boundaries, and a willingness to step back from obligations that no longer served her. In choosing to prioritize those needs, Amanda quietly dismantled a narrative that reality television often promotes, that exposure is inherently empowering, that being seen is always worth the cost. Her experience suggested otherwise. Visibility without agency, she seemed to demonstrate, could be corrosive. When fans reached out with messages of concern and support, Amanda responded selectively, thoughtfully. She didn't offer explanations about her departure. She didn't revisit old grievances. Instead, she focused on gratitude, resilience, and family. In doing so, she reframed her public presence on her own terms. This reframing unsettled assumptions. It suggested that a person could step away from a platform and still retain influence. That silence, when chosen deliberately, could be more powerful than constant disclosure. Amanda no longer needed to be present on television to shape the conversation around her. Within the broader reality television landscape, her story began circulating as an unspoken warning. Not a scandal, not a lawsuit, but a quiet example of what happens when someone refuses to trade authenticity for airtime. Other cast members, on other shows, paid attention. Some privately acknowledged feeling seen in her choice. She did what a lot of people wish they could do, one industry source admitted. She just left. That simplicity was deceptive. Walking away required financial sacrifice, public uncertainty, and the courage to relinquish a familiar identity. Amanda accepted those costs without spectacle. In doing so, she challenged the idea that participation was the only path forward. For TLC, the long-term implications were harder to measure. Ratings might fluctuate. Storylines could be reworked. But trust, once strained, was harder to rebuild. The silence surrounding Amanda's exit continued to feel conspicuous, a reminder that not all stories could be controlled. As time passed, the urgency of explanation gave way to a quieter understanding. Amanda Halterman had not disappeared. She had simply stepped out of a system that no longer aligned with her values. The show continued, but with a visible scar where she once stood. That scar became part of the show's legacy. For viewers, Amanda's journey offered something rare in reality television, a demonstration of choice that wasn't dictated by contracts or edits. It showed that leaving could be an act of strength, not failure. That reclaiming one's life didn't require public vindication. And as the industry continued to churn out new seasons, new faces, and new conflicts, Amanda's absence lingered as a quiet counterpoint, a reminder that reality, when reclaimed, doesn't need an audience to be real. In the end, Her story was no longer about what happened behind closed doors or what might be revealed later. It was about what she chose to protect when she walked away. And that choice, made without fanfare, continued to echo long after the cameras stopped searching for her. As Amanda Halterman settled into life beyond the cameras, the distinction between public perception and private reality became increasingly pronounced. The more the show tried to continue as if nothing had changed, the more apparent her absence became. Every interaction, every storyline that once relied on her presence, now carried the weight of what was missing. Viewers could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand why. Within the production, the challenge of maintaining continuity without Amanda grew more acute. Editors struggled to craft coherent narratives from footage that had been built around her mediating role. Scenes that once relied on her insight, humor, or emotional grounding now felt incomplete. Attempts to compensate with heightened drama or alternative storylines often fell flat, revealing how integral she had been to the show's structure. "This isn't just about one person missing a few scenes," a crew member explained. "Her energy shaped everything." At the same time, fan discourse continued to evolve. Social media conversations, once speculative and reactionary, became analytical. Viewers dissected episode edits, pointed out inconsistencies, and debated what had been lost. Clips were replayed and re-examined with a new perspective. Amanda's calm responses, her acts of support, her subtle interventions, these were now interpreted as signs of integrity rather than ordinary participation. Her absence became a mirror, reflecting the ways reality television often manipulates perception. Without Amanda present to mediate or challenge the narrative, the mechanics of editing, pacing, and conflict amplification became visible in sharper relief. Fans began to question the veracity of other storylines, asking whether the absence of a single voice had revealed a systemic tendency toward exaggeration. Meanwhile, Amanda herself remained carefully selective in her public communication. When she chose to share updates, they were candid, unfiltered, and deeply human. Health challenges, family milestones, moments of personal reflection, these became her new narrative, one entirely of her own making. She was no longer performing for a camera or for network approval. She was simply living. This shift had implications beyond her personal life. Her experience offered a quiet counter-narrative to the industry's assumptions. For other reality television participants, it became a case study in agency. The idea that refusing to be molded, manipulated, or overexposed could still command respect and attention. "She's rewriting the rules without making a scene," a friend noted. "Her absence is louder than any statement." Inside TLC, the ramifications were tangible. While the network continued production, the absence of Amanda's stabilizing influence required a recalibration of expectations. Story arcs had to be reimagined. Scenes were recut. Emotional beats that once landed naturally now needed framing devices to provide context. Even as the network pressed forward, analysts noted subtle changes in audience engagement. Some viewers remained loyal, but others were increasingly critical, aware that something was missing and less willing to suspend disbelief. Amanda's departure had highlighted how fragile the balance of reality television truly was, how much it depended on both participation and acquiescence. For Amanda, the contrast between her previous life on set and her new reality was stark. Away from production pressures, she could attend to her health, focus on family, and make choices without negotiation. Where the show had demanded performance, she now had autonomy. Where it had shaped her image, she could control it. The separation was restorative, but not without challenges. Walking away meant leaving behind not only financial security and visibility, but also the rhythms and structures that had defined daily life for years. Yet, according to those close to her, the relief of regaining agency far outweighed any sense of loss. Her story, gradually emerging through glimpses and updates, offered a rare lesson in reality television, that leaving is not necessarily defeat, and silence can be as potent as any confession. It highlighted the tension between authenticity and entertainment, illustrating the personal cost of remaining within a system that values drama over nuance. As the weeks turned to months, Amanda's absence continued to ripple through both the production and the audience. The show itself carried a shadow of her departure, visible in pacing, in emotional arcs, and in the gaps left where she had once intervened. Her story became both cautionary and inspiring, a testament to the power of choice in an industry built on visibility. And while fans speculated, networks recalculated, and production adapted, Amanda Halterman lived beyond the frame she had once inhabited. Free from the constraints of performance, she reclaimed the one narrative she had always truly owned, her own. The longer Amanda remained away from the cameras, the more her absence took on a weight of its own. It wasn't just that she was gone, it was that she had opted out on her own terms. That decision, simple on its surface, resonated far beyond the confines of production offices or social media discussions. It became a lens through which both viewers and industry professionals reconsidered the assumptions of reality television. Producers, for instance, began to realize that control was never as absolute as it seemed. They could plan, script, and edit with precision, but when a key participant refused to cooperate, the entire system had to flex. Amanda's departure illustrated that narrative influence wasn't solely in the hands of editors or executives. Participation, consent, and personal boundaries mattered, and when a cast member exercised them decisively, the consequences rippled outward. This insight was uncomfortable but unavoidable. Other cast members watched closely, reassessing their own limits and their own willingness to endure situations that felt exploitative. The show could continue, but the balance of power had subtly shifted. Amanda had, through absence, demonstrated that reality television's authority is contingent, not absolute. Meanwhile, audiences increasingly interpreted events through a new lens. Without Amanda's grounding presence on screen, storylines felt heightened, conflict-driven, and, at times, hollow. Longtime viewers, who had once accepted the framing of confrontations and emotional beats as natural, began noticing patterns of selective editing and emphasis. Clips that once seemed incidental were now scrutinized for manipulation. Fans questioned the authenticity of other cast members' portrayals, and discussion threads exploded with detailed analyses, speculation, and admiration for Amanda's choice to leave. Her exit had inadvertently fostered a more discerning viewership, one aware that reality TV could be shaped in ways that distorted intent, tone, and relationships. Amanda's refusal to participate in that distortion became a benchmark for integrity, challenging both her colleagues and her audience to rethink what authenticity truly meant. At the same time, Amanda's personal life continued on a path removed from spectacle. Health challenges, including heart irregularities and respiratory issues, required attention, slowing the pace that reality television had demanded. She focused on rest, recovery, and family, elements that had often been sidelined by filming schedules, conflict-driven storylines, and network expectations. Friends and family noted a profound shift in her demeanor. The intensity that had once been directed toward navigating production demands was now channeled into introspection, care, and deliberate decision-making. For Amanda, stepping away wasn't just about rejecting a show, it was about reclaiming the autonomy that the format had eroded over time. Even minor interactions with social media were carefully measured. She shared glimpses of personal growth, family moments, and updates on her health, but never framed as content for consumption. Each post reinforced the distinction between living authentically and performing for an audience. This recalibration had a subtle but meaningful impact. Fans responded with empathy, support, and admiration. She was no longer merely a personality on a television series. She became a symbol of agency, of the courage to prioritize well-being over expectation. Inside TLC, the implications were more concrete. Production continued, but Amanda's absence necessitated structural adjustments. Storylines had to be rewritten, emotional arcs recast, and character interactions restructured. Scenes that previously relied on her mediating presence now carried heightened tension or felt incomplete. Even routine moments were affected by the void she left. Executives and producers faced a quiet reckoning. Amanda's exit highlighted the fragility of their constructed narratives and the degree to which they depended on compliance. The network could maintain schedules, air episodes, and retain audience attention, but it could not fully reclaim the authenticity that Amanda had represented. Her choice had exposed the limits of control, reminding everyone involved that the human element cannot be manufactured or coerced. For Amanda herself, this period marked a reclamation of identity. Freed from the expectations and constraints of reality television, she was able to define her own pace, her own priorities, and her own story. The contrast between the curated life of the show and her lived experience became stark, but empowering. In stepping away, she not only protected her health and family, but also preserved the integrity of her own narrative. Her silence, deliberate and sustained, spoke louder than any public statement could. It conveyed autonomy, resilience, and a refusal to be reduced to a storyline. In an industry built on access, exposure, and control, Amanda Halterman's decision to walk away and to live quietly thereafter remained profoundly disruptive. As Amanda Halterman continued to distance herself from the pressures of 1000 LB Sisters, her absence became a silent force, reshaping both the show and the perceptions of those who followed it. What had once been a figure within a narrative now became a reference point outside of it, a reminder of the limits of influence, the importance of agency, and the costs of visibility. Within production, her departure forced a continuous process of recalibration. Scenes were rewritten, timelines adjusted, and story arcs compressed or reassigned. Amanda had been a pivot, a stabilizing presence whose presence shaped both conflict and resolution. Without her, interactions among the remaining cast members required artificial scaffolding to maintain coherence. The energy that she had naturally brought, the way she mediated tensions, offered clarity, or intervened at pivotal moments, could not be replicated by any edit or staging. For the audience, the effect was equally significant. Viewers noticed the difference intuitively. Episodes that once flowed with a messy but genuine rhythm now felt uneven, punctuated by heightened drama and unresolved moments. Discussion boards and social media became filled with analyses and comparisons. Clips from past seasons were revisited, not for nostalgia, but as evidence of what had been lost. Amanda's calm authority, her authenticity, her willingness to assert boundaries, all now appeared extraordinary against the backdrop of the show's ongoing content. In parallel, Amanda's own life unfolded in ways that contrasted sharply with the pace and pressure of production. Health concerns, heart irregularities, respiratory issues, and the exhaustion that came with recovery necessitated a slower, more intentional rhythm. Where reality television had demanded immediate reactions, staged confrontations, and constant visibility, Amanda's daily existence now prioritized quiet, stability, and control over her own narrative. This shift was transformative. She was no longer a participant in someone else's story. She was the author of her own. Every social media post, however brief or measured, became a reaffirmation of autonomy. Her audience no longer consumed her life as entertainment. They engaged with it as reality. Updates about health, family, or personal reflection resonated because they were unscripted, unfiltered, and entirely her own. Industry observers took note as well. Amanda's experience quietly challenged assumptions about compliance, endurance, and replaceability in reality television. Networks and producers recognized that a participant could assert boundaries and exit entirely without losing credibility or audience interest. Her absence, paradoxically, elevated her voice. By choosing silence, she commanded attention in a way that constant engagement never could. Inside TLC, the reverberations were practical and psychological. Storylines, schedules, and character arcs had to be reconstructed on short notice, but there was also a subtler effect. The network and production staff became more cautious in their approach to the remaining cast. The precedent Amanda set, a refusal to be manipulated, edited into conflict, or overexposed, was impossible to ignore. Her departure had demonstrated that power in reality television is contingent, not absolute, and that the human element cannot be fully controlled. For the remaining family members, Amanda's absence was deeply felt. Not merely as a gap in screen time, but as a shift in relational dynamics. She had often served as a bridge, a mediator, and a voice of reason. Without her, conflicts flared more readily, and resolutions lacked the organic grounding she had provided. The network could continue filming, but the equilibrium that once existed within the family unit was irrevocably altered. Meanwhile, Amanda's personal focus remained deliberate. Recovery, family care, and thoughtful engagement with the outside world defined her days. Public appearances were rare, updates intentional, and her presence on social media was selective. She was redefining the terms of connection, proving that influence need not rely on constant visibility or narrative participation. Her experience became emblematic of a broader truth about reality television. Participation is conditional, and authenticity cannot be manufactured. Amanda's choice illuminated the tension between exposure and agency, demonstrating that stepping away is not a retreat, but an act of self-preservation and empowerment. In doing so, she reshaped expectations, not only for her audience, but also for the industry itself. Her departure became a quiet benchmark for integrity, a reminder that control belongs as much to the individual as it does to the network. And even as 1,000 LB sisters pressed forward without her, the shadow of her absence lingered, visible in the gaps, the edits, and the altered dynamics, a testament to the enduring influence of someone who chose to leave on her own terms. As time passed, Amanda Halterman's absence became less of a shocking event and more of a defining marker for both the show and the larger reality television landscape. What had initially been framed as a dramatic exit evolved into a narrative about autonomy, resilience, and the cost of participation in an industry that prizes visibility above all else. Within TLC, the practical challenges persisted. Producers continued to work with the remaining cast, recalibrating storylines and reshaping emotional arcs that had once relied on Amanda's stabilizing presence. Scenes that previously flowed with her grounding influence now required careful restructuring. Moments that once landed naturally now felt heightened, artificially tense, or incomplete. Editors and producers became increasingly aware that her absence was not merely logistical, it was structural. The show had been built around her ability to mediate, soothe, and provide perspective, and without her, the dynamics shifted in ways that were impossible to fully compensate for. For the audience, the difference was subtle yet unmistakable. Viewers noted a change in pacing, in emotional resonance, and in the balance of conflict and resolution. Social media and fan forums erupted with discussions analyzing what had changed. Clips from past seasons were revisited, often highlighting Amanda's calm interventions, her moments of reason, or her capacity to defuse tension. Fans praised her absence as an act of integrity and autonomy, contrasting it with the heightened drama of current episodes. Amanda, meanwhile, occupied a life outside the camera's gaze, and in that space, her reality took on a clarity previously obscured by constant production demands. Health concerns, heart irregularities, respiratory challenges, and general fatigue required careful management, rest, and attention. Where the show had demanded immediate reactions, public engagement, and emotional escalation, Amanda's days became defined by deliberate choices, family priorities, and personal well-being. In essence, she reclaimed control over the aspects of life that truly mattered. Her selective communication with the public reinforced this autonomy. Updates were personal, measured, and free from narrative manipulation. Whether discussing health progress, family milestones, or moments of reflection, Amanda curated her presence intentionally, ensuring that the story she shared was hers alone. This control over visibility demonstrated that influence does not require constant exposure, nor does authenticity necessitate network mediation. Within the industry, Amanda's departure was quietly revolutionary. It challenged entrenched assumptions about compliance, replaceability, and the limits of agency in reality television. Executives and producers could script, stage, and edit, but Amanda's refusal to participate underscored the power of consent. Her silence, paradoxically, amplified her influence, signaling that leaving the frame on one's own terms can resonate more profoundly than any staged confession or orchestrated drama. For her family, the impact was felt deeply. Amanda had been a connective thread, mediating disputes, guiding conversations, and stabilizing conflicts. Without her presence, interactions on screen and off became sharper, less buffered, and more unpredictable. The network could continue production, but the equilibrium within the family unit had been disrupted, creating new challenges for storytelling and relational dynamics alike. Amanda's journey outside the cameras served as a broader lesson. It demonstrated that boundaries matter, that autonomy is a form of power, and that choosing well-being over visibility is an act of courage. Her experience became emblematic of the tension inherent in reality television between exposure and agency, reminding both viewers and industry professionals that authenticity cannot be manufactured, coerced, or edited into compliance. Ultimately, Amanda Halterman's choice to step away reshaped not only her own life, but also the perception of what participation in reality television entails. Her absence left an indelible mark on 1000 LB Sisters, altering storylines, dynamics, and audience expectations. It served as a powerful reminder that control over one's narrative, even if exercised through silence, remains one of the most potent forms of influence in a world built on access, exposure, and spectacle. Her decision to reclaim her life, health, and story underscored a profound truth. Sometimes the most impactful presence is created by absence, and the most powerful voice is the one that chooses when and how to speak. As the dust settled from Amanda Halterman's departure, the long-term ramifications of her choice began to reveal themselves more clearly. What had started as a sudden and dramatic exit became a sustained demonstration of autonomy, illustrating that stepping away from a narrative on one's own terms can reshape both perception and reality. Her absence became a focal point not just for fans, but for the industry itself, highlighting the tensions between storytelling, consent, and personal integrity. Within TLC, the operational challenges continued to evolve. Episodes that were partially built around Amanda had to be reworked. Scenes once reliant on her mediating presence or her ability to ground conversations now required creative reconstruction. Emotional beats, which she had naturally anchored, now needed artificial framing to land effectively. Editors and producers faced the difficult task of maintaining coherence while acknowledging a void that could not simply be replaced. Her absence was structural, affecting not just plot lines but the rhythm and tone of the show. Viewers, however, became increasingly aware of what had shifted. Social media discussions, fan analyses, and forum posts dissected episodes with renewed scrutiny. Moments that once appeared ordinary were now highlighted as evidence of Amanda's stabilizing influence. Fans praised her decision, framing it as an act of courage and integrity, and drew contrasts between her intentional absence and the heightened conflict that now dominated the screen. The narrative surrounding the show began to pivot, from a focus on drama and spectacle to a reflection on authenticity, control, and the human cost of reality television. Outside the lens of production, Amanda's life unfolded with a deliberate and restorative pace. Health challenges, ranging from heart irregularities to respiratory issues, required measured attention. The relentless demands of filming, social media engagement, and public scrutiny were replaced by moments of rest, recovery, and family connection. Freed from the expectations of performance, she began to reclaim not just her story, but the rhythms of her daily life. This restoration was both physical and psychological, allowing her to prioritize well-being over visibility. Her selective engagement with the public reinforced the principle of control. Each social media post, health update, or family reflection was deliberate, authentic, and self-directed. She no longer existed primarily as a reality television figure, but as an individual defining her own narrative. In doing so, she highlighted an important lesson. Influence and authenticity do not require constant exposure or editorial mediation. Within the broader reality television industry, Amanda's choice sent quiet but unmistakable ripples. Executives and producers recognized that control is contingent, not absolute. A cast member's refusal to comply, coupled with public support for that decision, undermined the traditional assumptions of authority. Her absence became a benchmark for agency, illustrating that personal boundaries, when asserted with clarity and resolve, carry weight both on and off screen. For her family, the impact was equally profound. Amanda had often acted as a bridge, providing emotional balance and mediation. Without her, dynamics shifted, conflicts became sharper, and resolutions required conscious effort from other family members. The relational equilibrium that had been subtly reinforced by her presence was no longer available, reshaping both on-screen interactions and behind-the-scenes relationships. Amanda's story, unfolding away from production pressures, ultimately reframed the conversation about reality television participation. It highlighted the human cost of constant exposure, the vulnerability inherent in being edited for entertainment, and the value of self-determination. Her departure became a powerful example of how one individual's choice to prioritize integrity and well-being can resonate far beyond personal boundaries, influencing audience perception and industry practices alike. In the months that followed, her silence spoke volumes. It conveyed strength, clarity, and a refusal to be coerced into a narrative that compromised her values. Even as 1000 LB Sisters continued production, her absence remained a potent reminder of the limits of control in reality television and the enduring power of personal agency. Amanda Halterman's decision, deliberate and unwavering, transformed her own life while leaving an indelible mark on the show, the family, and the viewers who had come to admire her for more than just what appeared on screen. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most profound impact is made not through participation, but through the conscious act of stepping away. Over time, Amanda Halterman's departure began to take on a significance that extended far beyond the immediate production challenges or viewer reactions. Her absence became a quiet but persistent force, reshaping perceptions of reality television, family dynamics, and personal agency. What started as a sudden walkout evolved into a prolonged demonstration of integrity, autonomy, and the power of intentional choice. Within TLC, the practical effects remained tangible. Scenes had to be restructured, storylines recalibrated, and emotional arcs reimagined to accommodate her absence. Where Amanda once acted as a grounding presence, smoothing tensions, bridging disagreements, and providing clarity, her absence created gaps that no editing trick could fully cover. Editors and producers faced a continuous challenge to maintain cohesion without the stabilizing influence of a central figure who had previously anchored both narrative and emotion. Audiences quickly picked up on the difference. Episodes felt sharper, more tension-laden, and in some ways, less authentic. Fans began dissecting past footage, highlighting moments where Amanda had offered calm, reasoned interventions that softened conflicts or added emotional nuance. Her absence was no longer merely noticeable. It became instructive, a lens through which viewers could understand how reality television manipulates perception, emphasizes drama, and structures conflict. Away from the cameras, Amanda's personal journey contrasted sharply with the on-screen chaos. Health concerns, including heart irregularities and respiratory difficulties, required deliberate attention. The relentless pace of filming and social media engagement was replaced by rest, reflection, and family care. Freed from the demands of performance, Amanda could prioritize the aspects of life that mattered most, reclaiming control over her time, energy, and narrative. Her engagement with the public, though measured and selective, reinforced her autonomy. Updates about health, family milestones, and personal reflections were shared deliberately, unscripted, and unfiltered. She no longer existed primarily as a reality TV personality, but as an individual whose story was self-directed. By reclaiming her narrative, Amanda illustrated that influence and presence do not require constant visibility or editorial mediation. The ripple effects extended into the broader industry. Amanda's decision demonstrated that participants could assert boundaries, exercise agency, and leave without losing credibility or audience support. Producers and executives realized that control in reality television is never absolute. A single cast member's refusal to comply can unsettle storylines, audience expectations, and the assumed hierarchy of authority. Amanda's absence quietly redefined the balance of power, showing that personal boundaries carry tangible influence. Her family also experienced the impact profoundly. Amanda had often served as the connective tissue within the household, mediating disputes, offering perspective, and stabilizing relationships. Without her, interactions became more volatile, resolutions less organic, and emotional dynamics more exposed. The show could continue filming, but the equilibrium that Amanda had provided was gone, forcing remaining cast members to navigate tensions more consciously. Amanda's story, lived away from cameras and production pressures, reframed the understanding of reality television participation. It highlighted the human cost of exposure, the vulnerabilities of being edited for entertainment, and the empowerment inherent in choosing oneself over narrative convenience. Her absence became a powerful lesson in agency, illustrating that leaving can be as influential as staying, and that silence, when chosen deliberately, can speak louder than any scripted confrontation. Even as 1000 LB Sisters continued its production, Amanda's absence remained palpable. Her decision to step away, unwavering and deliberate, underscored the importance of autonomy and the power of choosing one's own path. It was a lasting reminder that participation is conditional and that sometimes reclaiming one's life requires walking away, not in defeat, but in full possession of self. In reclaiming her narrative, her health, and her family focus, Amanda Halterman transformed her exit into a quiet revolution, one that resonated with viewers, challenged industry norms, and demonstrated the enduring power of personal agency in a world built on exposure and spectacle. As the months stretched on, the resonance of Amanda Halterman's decision to walk away from 1000 LB Sisters continued to unfold in ways both visible and subtle. What had initially appeared as a sudden, high-profile exit had matured into a prolonged statement about the limits of control, the value of autonomy, and the meaning of integrity in the often performative world of reality television. Her absence no longer felt temporary or incidental. It became structural, shaping how the show operated, how viewers interpreted it, and how the industry reflected on its practices. Within TLC, the reverberations were ongoing. Scenes and storylines built around Amanda required continuous adjustment, often forcing producers to rethink emotional arcs and interactions. Moments that had relied on her mediation and perspective now felt hollow, overly dramatized, or unresolved. Editors attempted to bridge the gaps, but her unique presence, calm, deliberate, and grounded, could not be replaced. The rhythm of the show, once balanced by her stabilizing influence, now carried the echo of what was missing. Viewers, meanwhile, grew increasingly aware of the contrast. Social media commentary shifted from speculation to reflection, as fans dissected both past and current footage to trace Amanda's impact. Her interventions, which had once seemed ordinary, now stood out as critical touchpoints that shaped family dynamics, tempered conflicts, and provided emotional clarity. Her absence illuminated the mechanics of reality television, revealing the ways in which editing, narrative framing, and selective focus could manufacture tension and exaggerate disputes. Beyond the screen, Amanda's life reflected a reclamation of autonomy and well-being. Health concerns, including heart irregularities and respiratory challenges, demanded patience, care, and rest. Freed from production schedules and social media expectations, she prioritized her recovery, family, and personal growth. Every decision became intentional, whether it was engaging selectively with fans, sharing updates, or creating boundaries to protect her energy. In doing so, she demonstrated that agency is not granted by a network or audience. It is exercised and defended. Her choice resonated beyond personal boundaries. Industry observers noted the quiet yet profound impact of her exit. Amanda's refusal to be molded or manipulated highlighted the limits of authority in reality television, illustrating that narrative influence is contingent, not absolute. Executives and producers recognize that participants hold power, that compliance is not guaranteed, and that an individual's decision to walk away can alter both production and perception in lasting ways. Within her family, the shift was equally pronounced. Amanda had been a mediator, a voice of reason, and a stabilizing force. Without her, interactions became more volatile, resolutions less organic, and emotional dynamics more exposed. The equilibrium she provided, both on-screen and off, had vanished, compelling remaining family members to navigate relationships with heightened awareness. Her absence was felt deeply, underscoring her importance beyond mere screen time. Amanda's ongoing narrative, lived privately, shared selectively, and defined on her own terms, reframed the understanding of participation in reality television. It underscored the human cost of exposure, the vulnerabilities inherent in being edited for drama, and the empowerment that comes from asserting control over one's story. By stepping away, she redefined influence, showing that absence, when deliberate, can carry more weight than constant engagement. Even as 1,000 LB sisters moved forward without her, the shadow of Amanda Halterman remained. Her choice challenged assumptions, disrupted expectations, and provided a quiet, enduring example of integrity. It reminded viewers, producers, and the industry at large that authenticity cannot be manufactured, that participation is conditional, and that sometimes the most profound statement is made not by speaking, but by walking away. Ultimately, Amanda's story became less about a single television show and more about the assertion of agency in a world structured around control, visibility, and spectacle. Her departure, measured and unwavering, left a lasting imprint, not just on the series or the network, but on viewers who recognized the courage, clarity, and quiet power in reclaiming one's own life. In choosing dignity, well-being, and self-determination over narrative convenience, Amanda Halterman demonstrated that the truest reality is the one we preserve for ourselves, and that stepping away can sometimes be the most disruptive, transformative, and enduring act of all.